hello. You find me today by my boat and we're going to go for a little walk together because I did a video last week about the current canal crisis, and if you saw it you will have seen that quite a lot of my time last week was taken up with initially trying to reason with and eventually just deleting comments from people who were determined to tell me that I was absolutely wrong under all circumstances and provide precisely zero evidence for their comments. Now I knew that was going to happen. There's a certain sort of nut job who likes their conspiracy theories and won't take evidence for an answer. So I thought today what would be helpful would be to do a little review of how we are where we are, and also to talk a bit about some valid criticisms of the CRT and some invalid criticisms of the CRT, and there are both freely available. Now I should say I think I've learnt my lesson from the last video. I'm really not going to engage with the nutters, I'm afraid. I'm just going to delete the lunar comments. I don't mean people who disagree with me. If you think I've got something factually wrong, tell me, preferably provide some evidence. If you disagree with my opinions, disagree with them, that's absolutely fine. That is not an issue. If you just want to post saying, oh, the CRT's terrible, oh, they're stealing water, Jewish space lasers, then, sorry, I'm just not going to engage. I'm really not. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry, actually. I'm not remotely sorry. I'm just not going to engage. Now, let's start at the very beginning. So, when the canals were built, they were obviously built privately, so they were privately owned things, and they were all owned by different companies, or largely owned by different companies. Now that's not quite exactly the situation, because in order to get built through loads of people's land, that you couldn't really very well go to every single little landowner and negotiate separately. So they negotiated with the big landowners, the rich ones with titles, because obviously you can't do anything to a titled person. But broadly speaking, they got Acts of Parliament, which meant that you had to go and get MPs to vote on it, and they would say that on the one hand, yes, you may build your canal and you may compulsorily purchase the land that it needs to go on, but they also had a tendency to apply some restrictions as well. And those restrictions were generally along the lines of you have to maintain navigation, you have to maintain the canal to a certain standard, you're not allowed to close the canal, so basic things like that. So they're privately owned but with some essentially governmental oversight, and that worked perfectly well for 150 to 200 years. When I say perfectly well, it didn't work perfectly well in terms of the canals. Quite a lot of the canal owners ended up being railway companies, and you can sort of see why. You don't want rivals to be able to undercut you on price, if not on speed. Oh hello, there's a heron coming up ahead. I wonder how long he will stay there, or she will stay there, before she gets annoyed and flies off. In any case, they didn't necessarily buy the canals for altruistic reasons. Quite often there are some canals that were bought by railway companies with the express intention of closing them down, filling them in and building a railway on them. I had a video a couple of videos ago about the Newport Pagnell Canal, which that exact thing happened to. Hello, Heron. Goodness gracious me. Goodbye, Heron. Right. And sometimes they'd buy canals with the express intention of running them into the ground, not really maintaining them, in order to remove the competition. But broadly speaking, the canals worked well in private ownership. up until the sort of early years of the 20th century, when it became a real struggle to make any money out of canals. Now, what happened was, in the aftermath of the Second World War, a whole bunch of stuff was nationalised. This isn't a video about socialism, go and argue that elsewhere. But one of the things that were nationalised were the canals. They were taken under the aegis of the government and controlled by the British Transport Board. British Transport Commission initially, and British Transport Board. And their remit was really, frankly, to manage the winding down of the canals and, try and keep a couple of them that were still commercially viable open, but basically close them all down. And they did. Lots in the 1950s. Hundreds and hundreds of miles of canals were abandoned, filled in, turned into motorways, etc., etc. By the 1960s, the British Transport Commission had turned into the British Transport Board and then been further split up into various different transport options, one of which was British Waterways. And they really had a very similar remit at the start, viz. To close down all the unprofitable canals and only keep the commercially profitable ones. And what happened basically straight away, as soon as British Waterways was created, was that there was a horrendous winter and all the boats got frozen in and nobody could move, and it was all a bit, full on. So over the next couple of years, essentially all of the commercial use of the canals, virtually all of the commercial use of the canals, ceased entirely. So they were sort of left with this bit of a white elephant, and it was going to be a sort of dead end of British history. Maybe a couple of miles be kept for a museum, but basically it'll all be filled in, have houses built on it. But the leisure industry, which had, by the way, started quite some time earlier, like 19th century, was getting interested in the canals, and people like the Inland Waterways Association, and there's excellent histories of those available, including the massive arguments which went on within it. But anyway, they were starting to lobby, and the upshot was that gradually over time, British Waterways stopped being the people that were trying to close all the canals and started being, either another heron or the same one back again, and started being the people that wanted to conserve the canals and make money out of their leisure use. Hello, heron. Are you just going to stay there as I walk past? Goodness gracious me, you are a tame heron. Thank you very much. Now, so by the sort of, let's say, 1990s, 2000s, British Waterways was effectively a quango. That is to say, a quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisation. Another way of putting that would be it was acted very much like a business, had profit and loss accounts and all the rest of it, and had its own chairpeople and had its own decisions that it made. But it was essentially, I suppose you could characterise it, it's not quite true, but you could characterise it as being having one shareholder, and that was the government. And so it was funded by the government directly. It was owned by the government, the canals are owned by the government, the whole lot owned by the government, run by this slightly arm's length organisation. And around about 2009 or so, they started to think if they could make it work better by taking it from the second sector into the third sector, so taking it from government into what they call a mutual ownership. In other words, instead of being owned by the government on behalf of the people, being owned by the people. So it was British Waterways that actually proposed the mutualisation, and it was reasonably enthusiastically taken up. Various MPs were in favour of it, and I can totally see why. The idea is that by mutualising it, it becomes a national asset owned by everybody rather than a governmental millstone. And they created a charity to run the canals on behalf of the people, and that is the Canal and River Trust. So I guess the difference is like the difference between English Heritage and the National Trust, right? English Heritage is a quango, and it runs government-owned properties on behalf of the government, Corfe Castle and Stonehenge and so on. And the National Trust is a mutual organisation. It's owned by its members. In the case of the National Trust, those people who have National Trust membership, and they hold the buildings that they, quote, own on behalf of the people. The Canal and River Trust does that. There's a couple of problems with that, which I think is a fair criticism of the CRT that they didn't see coming. But we'll get to that in a second. Essentially, when it was set up, the aim always was for the CRT to be self-funding. And the idea was that the government would provide funding for an initial number of years and very gradually move it across to being self-funding. Now, we'll talk about why that maybe wasn't the best idea in a minute. But that's basically where we are. Funded by the government, but owned by a charity, or run by a charity and owned by the people. Unfortunately, about 2 years ago, the then Conservative government, and again this isn't a political thing, so please no rants against Labour or Conservatives or Greens or whatever it is you don't like today, but the Conservative government at the time decided that they didn't want to fund it, and they unilaterally imposed on the Canal and River Trust a settlement consisting of less and less money until the money runs out entirely in about 5 or 6 years' time. That's something of a disaster because for one reason or another the Canal and River Trust has not become self-sufficient. So what it effectively has had over the past about 15 years is progressively more and more and more funding cuts in effect. So that is the situation. That's where we are. We have a charity running the canals that manifestly does not have enough money, knows it does not have enough money, and there is no particular solution in sight. So let's move on to section 2 of this little chat. Criticisms of the CRT, which I think are probably fair. It's not unreasonable, is it, to argue that the Canal and River Trust kind of should have seen this coming when it was set up. In fairness to the CRT, they were told there were funding streams which they ended up not being able to realise, and they were told that the government would guarantee a certain amount of help. So much like the privatised railways, if the railways make a loss, then their losses are guaranteed by the government. Both of those promises were broken in subsequent years, a couple of years ago in fact, specifically. So, you could argue they needed more foresight. I don't think they could have seen too much coming, but yeah, maybe they could have been. Second thing, which I think is fair, is that with the decrease in the amount of money, they have done some things which are understandable but a bit on the short-sighted side. They've sold off properties in order to keep the whole system going. They have contracted out maintenance to third-party companies, which I suppose you could argue the toss, but I can't think of a situation in which contracted out services like water or postal service or whatever has gone well. I'm prepared to be wrong. You tell me in the comments contracted out services that have gone brilliantly, but what I can tell you is that quite a lot of the lock repair, general maintenance and so on, and just like basic things like grass cutting and so on, were lost. and have not been got back again. And so as a result, there is a certain make, do and mend attitude that's had to have been over the past few years. Lack of money, lack of resources, locks being sort of shored up to carry on for a day or two or a year or two rather than actually mended and this sort of stuff. And you know, that is a fair point. It's not 100% their fault, but you know, you can always manage money better, you can always manage situations better, and hindsight is an astonishing thing. Having reached a massive concrete bridge, I'm going to turn around and we're going to go back again through the nice rural bit. Now, the next section of this is whinges you are going to hear about the Canal and River Trust, which are obvious nonsense. Broadly speaking, any comment which starts, it stands to reason that, has got about a 95% chance of being absolute nonsense. So, common ones are they pay their fill-in senior manager here far too much. Just think about how much you could buy with, with all that money. It's broadly nonsense. So, a popular one is their finance director got a large bonus. I think it was 30 grand for the financial performance of the investments. So yes, they could have clawed that back. They could have not had the finance director. They would have saved 30 grand, which someone pointed out is about 1 3/4 lot gates. But his financial investments brought in, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was certainly more than $1 million. It's quite a lot of lot gates anyway. So if you need to pay people money to do that, which you do, and if you need to pay people money to get the best people, which you do, then that's money well spent. People generally have eye-popping, oh my god, the chief executive gets paid, and then they put in some hilarious sum which is wrong. He does get paid a lot of money, Richard Parry, but he gets paid a lot less, for example, than the CEO of any comparably sized charity, certainly a lot less than the CEO of the National Trust. Yeah, he gets paid a lot of money, but shout at society, that's what CEOs cost, right? What are other nonsense accusations? Oh yes, right, the CRT hates continuous cruisers. They really don't. What they hate is continuous cruisers who take the piss, by which I mean, when you're a continuous cruiser, you have to move along every couple of weeks and you have to move a certain distance. And there's a good reason for that. And essentially, most continuous cruisers, if you simply had a line in the rules saying, don't take the piss, would understand completely, don't take the prime moorings, move on, don't stay somewhere for 6 months, all this sort of stuff. But unfortunately, there is a small but extremely present group of boaters who don't understand that the canals are not there for their own personal benefit solely. And so they want to stay at the same place for 6 months, they want to set up their own garden, they want to expand onto the towpath, they don't want to pay their licence fee, all this sort of stuff. And so the CRT has to set some limits on continuous cruising, otherwise a small number of boaters would absolutely dominate the whole system. Now the limits that they set, broadly speaking, one of the big complaints is that the limits that they set are ridiculous, and the reason why they are slightly ridiculous, but the reason why they are ridiculous is that people try and find loopholes, and so they have to close them. That's pretty much the way that it goes. There's been one or two, really well publicised cases that people have managed to get into the press. There was a dude on the Kennet and Avon Canal who didn't pay his licence fee and didn't pay mooring fees for years and years and years and years and years. And when the CRT eventually nicked his boat, he screamed about being made homeless. Well, you made yourself homeless, mate. And yes, he was vulnerable, but he also was extremely good at PR. The other sort of nonsense accusation which gets made a lot is that the CRT are incompetent. Now, okay, let's be sensible. There are incompetencies around the CRT, as there are around every organisation, right? There's people that get stuff wrong, there's people that push the wrong button on the computer, there's people, you know, that send out the wrong letter to the wrong person, this sort of stuff. But no, broadly, the issue with, oh, such and such a lock gate is leaky, or such and such a canal hasn't been dredged. So yeah, absolutely, it's expensive. We haven't got any money. So, you know, we've got to do more and more and more with less and less and less. And unfortunately, most of the complaints are basically whinging that they haven't spent the little money that they have on this person's particular favourite mile of canal. Now, within that, there is some fair point. Okay, lock gates are difficult to make, and they used to have 3 workshops to make them. Now they've got 1. So, you know, there's quite a lot of locks. Locks last about 25 to 30 years. So yeah, there are some pretty, you know, horrendous lock gates around the system. I've complained myself about the odd one. Although, by the way, when I complained about, it was the ones at Long Buckby, and it wasn't that they hadn't replaced them, they had. It was that they'd used a contractor to replace them who'd managed not to grease any of the paddles. Now, that was a minor irritation, but, you know, if you're going to replace the lock gate, at least try and make it, you know, better than it was before. I mean, broadly speaking, as far as I can see, the Canal and River Trust do an okay job. Not perfect. They get stuff wrong all the time. They've made some unfortunate decisions which they felt they had to make, and, you know, they spent money on rebranding, which I don't know if it brought in money or not, but one assumes that you know, they thought about whether it would bring in money or not before they did it. And there is a small minority of boaters that are simply going to say the CRT are dreadful, whatever they do, even if they reduced their licence fee to nothing and, you know, gave them a free car. The other thing is, people always complain about is, well, you know, I pay my licence fee so that they don't maintain the locks. Well, yeah, you do pay your licence fee, but boaters, they pay about 12% of the actual costs of running the canals in total. So, you know, you should really be happy if 12% of the locks you go through are in good condition. Oh, I pay my licence fee and they're not, and all they're doing is redoing towpaths for cyclists, and cyclists don't pay anything. Okay, well, you know, good luck making cyclists pay anything. And the canals are there for everybody, for walkers, for fishermen, for cyclists, for everybody. That's what they're for in this day and age. They're for the whole country, not just people who own a boat. I think that's really important. So this has slightly turned into a bit of a rant, and I know people are going to get awful in the comments, but don't worry about it. I'm just going to, you know, I'm just going to delete all the comments that are... No, I'll leave the comments that criticise me, that's fair enough. But I'm going to take away the ones that are, you know, factually inaccurate and nonsense. If you want to say the CRT are ripping us off, stealing water, deliberately failing to maintain the system, that sort of thing, leave evidence, please. Leave evidence and I'll leave the comments up. With that in mind, this is a bit of a rant, but I hope you enjoyed it. I shall do something more pleasant next video. I shall go and have a look at another piece of ruined canal or something lovely like that. So I shall see you next time. Goodbye.